100 years will be ready by next June. This is Colonel Robert Sinkler, the Hurricane Protection Commander for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
The Corps of Engineers did accept responsibility primarily for the four failures that occurred on the outfall canals and in the Inner Harbor Navigation Canal, primarily due to design issues. But since then, we've actually taken those areas out of the system, and what we want to do is really fight the storm surge at the perimeter of the city rather than allowing storm surge to penetrate into the middle of downtown New Orleans.
Harry Shearer, your response.
You have Colonel Sinkler admitting responsibility, which is one step beyond what the President has done. The Corps has adopted a perimeter response. It's a good idea, assuming that all elements of the perimeter system are up to snuff, because once water gets in, they have not fixed the defective flood walls that failed so catastrophically last time. In my film is a whistleblower from the Army Corps of Engineers whose responsibility was to test and install the new pumps on those outfall canals, which are essential to keeping those canals at a safe water level defined by the Corps. She says unequivocally the pumps never passed their testing. They failed, they self-destructed, they were installed anyway, and they will not withstand a hurricane event.
Harry Shearer, your film goes into the wetlands around New Orleans. Talk about the role of the Army Corps and Engineers around this.
Well, you know, now the wetlands is the slow-motion disaster that's been going on for the last 30 or 40 years. The Corps levied the Mississippi River in response to the flood, the disastrous flood down here, and they have succeeded in making the river not a threat to New Orleans. But the river, by flooding, would replenish the wetlands with sediment every flood time. And now that sediment gets dumped into a hole at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. The Corps didn't really anticipate that that would start starving the wetlands. Then the second blow to the wetlands was when oil was discovered in the Gulf, and oil companies started making thousands of miles of canals and pipelines to get their equipment out to the Gulf and to bring the oil back. This allowed salt water to intrude into the marsh, killing the vegetation, which then left the soil unanchored. And we've been losing an acre of marsh every hour for the last decade or two. Richard Campanella, a geographer at Tulane, who's in my film, says we have a window of about 10 to 20 years to start reversing this before sea level rise makes it a futile attempt. That's another thing I looked for in the President's speech yesterday, in vain, a commitment for serious resources to deal with coastal restoration. In this year's budget, the President has asked for the munificent sum of $33 million, 1/10 of the amount of money he's asked for to clean up the water in the Great Lakes.
And how does the oil spill disaster that continues to unfold in the Gulf of Mexico impact the wetlands and the coastal restoration near New Orleans?
Well, you know, we know that there are some serious issues with regard to the deep water, the plume and the existence of dispersed oil. The teams that have been out actually scouting the marsh, their initial reports, although they are subject to more rigorous science, are that the wetlands are, have not been as seriously affected by this spill as it was first feared. I think the most important thing about the BP oil spill with regard to the wetlands is it may have put the subject of Louisiana's wetlands on the national agenda for a change, that people are now aware of this fragile but very important resource. The wetlands serve a huge function of what Bob Verchik of Loyola calls natural infrastructure. I don't know the exact ratio, but they serve to buffer and beat down the ferocity of incoming hurricanes, both wind and storm surge. So they are our natural protection system, and we've been losing that, as I say, in a slow-motion disaster over 3 decades.
Harry Shearer, talk about the distribution of your film, and your recent post on Huffington Post talks about NPR, the initial stand for nothing. Explain what you mean.
Well, NPR announced recently that they're no longer National Public Radio, that the initial stand for NPR. After I found out that they were not going to do a story about this film on either All Things Considered or Morning Edition, I decided to buy some time, those enhanced underwriting announcements at the end of each half hour. And NPR Legal told me this language was unacceptable. Quote, documentary about why New Orleans flooded. The only language that they found acceptable was documentary about New Orleans and Hurricane Katrina. And when I told them it's not about a hurricane, that was the end of this conversation.
And your film is showing across the country tonight?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I thought, I knew you could see sort of coming that the mainstream media were going to do basically reruns of the coverage from 5 years ago. Here's me in water, and here's me with a person on a roof, and more footage of suffering people, and some where are they now, you know, where's Ray Nagin now, where's Mike Brown now. But we're still not going to ask the question, why did it happen? So I thought the night after that whole barrage kind of climaxed, it would be a good opportunity to offer people a chance to spend 90 minutes and find out why this thing happened.
Well, Harry Shearer, thank you so much for joining us. Actor, writer, director, satirist, musician, and radio host. He's the voice of dozens of characters in The Simpsons, and his latest project is a feature-length documentary about the causes of the flooding of New Orleans. It's called The Big Uneasy. We'll end with a clip from the film.
When they couldn't get my own faculty to get rid of me, they made the decision to terminate my position. What was very insulting is they couldn't tell me why. You know, I felt like a good pair of shoes just being cast off.
There have been generally no consequences for this catastrophic failure.
Well, we want to ensure that folks are accountable and responsible for their actions.
I have no doubt that heads should roll. The fact that Ivors is the head that seems to be rolling is the height of irony.
The Army Corps builds incompetent levees in New Orleans, and Congress says, here's 10 or 20 billion, go fix your mistakes.
It's going to be very difficult to change the culture of that agency.
The Army Corps destroys wetlands, and then Congress says, here's some money to go fix them up.
Whether we like it or not, it was political. Now, I don't say political in a negative sense, just it was political.
Congressmen and women and senators want Army Corps projects in their districts. They want to bring home the bacon.
It's part of how our government works.
The Big Uneasy. Stay with us. We'll be back in a minute, and we'll go to New Orleans. Katrina Blues by Ronnie Earl here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Anjali Kamath. On